Greetings to all of our listeners. Welcome to the Together on Mission podcast. I am Bishop Scott Seeley, the suffragan bishop of the Anglican Diocese of All Nations, a diocese in the Anglican Church in North America. And with me as my co-host today is the Venerable Canon Isaac Rayberg, our diocesan officer for liturgy and the rector of All Saints Anglican Church in San Antonio.
It's good to be back with you, Bishop.
Today, our topic is lay ministry, and with us on today's episode is the Venerable Canon Mark Ball, our diocesan officer for church planting, the archdeacon for the Rio Grande Valley, and the rector of Missio Dei Anglican Church in Houston, as well as the Venerable Peter Johnson, archdeacon of Louisiana, rector of Trinity Anglican Church in Lafayette, and ministry president at Anglican Compass. Gentlemen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here. Love what you're doing, and it's going to be fun to talk about this today.
Thank you, Bishop. We're glad to be here.
Well, thank you again. We have this wonderful topic today to discuss about lay ministry. And so I have a question that's going to be asked to Venerable Mark on lay ministry. Venerable Mark and I love the Anglican mission theologian, Roland Allen. And so Venerable Mark, Roland Allen's understanding of lay ministry has impacted me as a pastor over the years. I know he's impacted you. How do you think that Roland Allen can be helpful for parishes in the diocese in our 21st century post-Christian context?
Well, yeah, just a quick review. Anybody who's listening who doesn't know what Roland Allen did, Roland Allen was a missionary, a British missionary, and primarily in India. He did some work in China as well. And he wrote a book called Missionary Methods, St. Paul's or Ours, and a follow-up response to the critiques from that book called The Spontaneous Expansion of the Church. And I think it's important. It's very important because, it doesn't matter what church you're part of. Every church is saying, how can we get lay people more involved to some degree? Now, what kind of involvement and what lay people do, it varies by context. But no one doubts the fact that the priesthood of all believers and the ministry and the work of the church is the work of the lay people, and the leaders are there to equip the lay people for the work of ministry. What Roland Allen saw is that there was an opportunity for lay people to really be initial gatherers and leaders of small congregations, and that we didn't have to send out a fully ordained person into the edge mission field to plant a church. And one of the challenges he saw was that if you did, particular in mission context, if you took someone out of India, took them back to Oxford, trained them, and sent them back to India, they actually became half as effective at gathering people. And so he had some critiques of that sort of imperialistic method, and some of those do apply today. I think the key is that we all agree that lay leaders need opportunities to grow in their ministry, that God has given great gifts to lay leaders. Yeah. And so we want to see those grow. And then in discernment, we might determine that a person, typically in the old days called a lay catechist, in our diocese, we now call a lay missioner, someone who might lead a small congregation. And this is typically, it starts out as some kind of edge work. It starts out as working in a small town that doesn't have a church or apartment complex or a nursing home, or even an evening service set up for college students. In these contexts, there's a wonderful opportunity, and we see this in other denominations, for lay people to exercise a great deal of ministry under the authority of a local rector and deeply connected to the church, not separate and independent. So all of that to say, it's one of the great tools in the tool bag. It's not the tool for every person in every situation. And I think that as we practice this, we'll know more, as we do it, who should be put in that context, who shouldn't, what situations are right for it. We found that if someone's going to start a Sunday morning service in a place where a lot of Anglicans exist, or a lot of expectation around Anglicanism, or even just the morning service, that person probably just we need to have an ordained person there, or someone in the ordination track, because all of the weight of Sunday morning falls on you the minute you start your service at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. on a Sunday. That's not a great context. But an evening service, a weekend service, a service out at a different location, a non-typical, someone's gathering people at a college or maybe it's a fire station. That all the weight of the morning service isn't on those things, and that a layperson could be very good, and that's a good way to give people opportunity to grow in their ministry.
Yeah. Well, and I think, reflecting on Alan and his work and his ministry, we're never going to have a movement of God if the laity are not empowered and released for the work of ministry. And I think, over the years, I've been convicted by this. I've been challenged by this. I've tried to implement it to the best of my ability. But you can always grow in this, in your knowledge of this and your practice of this. And so I'm excited that the diocese is emphasizing this. And that we're putting it to the forefront of diocesan ministry. I think it's an amazing thing because in the 21st century, especially with some of those other options of church, expressions of church, it doesn't matter where you are. There's people that work on Sunday mornings. And so, if that's the only kind of time where you're going to have a worship service, what are they going to do?
Well, and we have a lot of relationships with chaplains in our diocese. We have a good relationship with jurisdiction, a lot of overlap there, and the chaplain work is in the world, is under the context of another organization, and so we can see there that there are people who flock to those kind of church adjacent gatherings. That's where they are spiritually, emotionally, and they connect well, and so. Rather than seeing those as a kind of giving up, we can really our evangelistic approach can really use those realities that people will come at 5 p.m. on a Sunday, that they won't come at 9 a.m. just because it means something different to them, and we understand the differences a lot of times too. So that chaplain kind of work, that middle place for people to gather makes a lot of sense.
If I could ask a follow-up, I'm not familiar with Roland Allen's work, but you mentioned that he found in his context that sending them away to Oxbridge for that education, that ordination, was actually counterproductive. Why was that so counterproductive? And what can we learn in our context from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the key about contextualizing that what was happening at Oxford, and this doesn't always happen, but you basically are trying to make a proper Englishman out of someone from India, and when they go back, they're suited to run an English cathedral church or an expat church, but they lose their suitability in many ways to connect to their own people where they came from, and so it's not that you don't do that sometimes. It's just you're not going to reach all the neighborhoods that way. Plus, think about time. That might be a 6-year process where they go and come back, and so just the sense that the spontaneous, when God's moving, He raises up battlefield leaders, and so that's a little bit challenging when you're using mission field strategies in something that has been a Christendom kind of place, and so I would say that those who are more missional and thinking about reaching lost people and building churches with lost people, they have to use these same tools. They try to stay as culturally relevant as they can without losing the gospel, without losing the scriptures, which is obviously challenging in every culture. But they want to make sure that there's no needless thing blocking the people coming to the faith. Whereas the established church is thinking much more about what's the fullness of what we have. How do we provide the fullness of the sacraments and the reality of the church to the people of God? The missionary is thinking, how do I get them connected in the first place? And so they're not actually antithetical at all, but they don't. If you train someone to teach people how to live into the fullness, and they get very good at that, and they're passionate about that, there is a draw to that. But there are people who just won't ever get reached. They're just too far at the edge, and that's why we believe the scripture says go to them, go and proclaim the gospel.
Yeah, I remember that this is ages ago, that first or maybe second Anglican 1000 conference. I don't know if any of y'all were there.
I was there. That's the first one I went to.
Yeah, that's the only one I went to. Tim Keller was late Timothy Keller was the keynote, and something that he said always stuck out to me was that every movement ends up getting institutionalized, but a healthy institution will always have a certain amount of movement DNA in it. And so that's really our challenge, both as a movement, ACNA is kind of tiny, but also it's also very institutional.
Yeah. Well, and Anglicanism tends toward the institutional. I mean, in terms of the range of denominations, we have more of those tools. And that's actually good, because if we go on mission and stay connected to the institution, we have some structures and support that can make things last a long time. So it's really just thinking about what works within our context, but takes into account some of these things, which is that often lost people, as they come to faith, bring more people into the church than people who have been there for 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, that same reality is like, okay, what's the evangelist doing? What's the catechist doing, or the lay missioner doing, and who's the right person to do that?
Yeah. Well, that leads us, I think, into the second question I want to ask, and I'll ask it to Venerable Peter. And that question is, how do rectors discern the right people for the job in lay ministry? I think that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
It is. One place that my mind goes in considering this question is the Rule of St. Benedict, which has a really interesting passage that describes what you should do when somebody new is coming to the monastery, right? To the community of monks. And according to the rule, you actually don't admit the person who comes immediately, which is a surprising word.
Yeah.
It's not our inclination. Our normal inclination is to take hold of any indication of interest, or even try to create interest where there isn't any. We're so eager to pull people in to the work that we pounce on any opportunity. But the wisdom in the Rule of St. Benedict is, look, this kind of ministry is, it requires some seriousness and some endurance and commitment, and a deep desire, right, to be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so in the rule, it says, don't take that person in the first day. They have to come back again. Now, how this applies in any given parish context, obviously you're not, saying you can't come into the church service or something like that. But the point is, you have to give small opportunities for people to be engaged, and then see that they can be faithful in those small things.
Yeah.
And then when they are, you gradually give more.
Yeah.
And this, of course, is in the pattern of what Jesus says, right? He who is faithful in little shall be faithful in much.
Yeah.
So I think we need to resist the feeling or the sense that we know who the right people are, which isn't to say, sometimes the Lord will give us a kind of a leading or a spiritual sense about a particular person.
Yeah.
But we should be hesitant to say that, we know precisely who are the right people, for lay ministry, because we're, our own judgment is based upon our own experiences, which are limited, and instead give kind of small opportunities and see who takes them.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience of that when I was first coming back to my Anglican roots. I met with a rector here locally, who's now retired, but he saw a call on my life, and he says, okay, we're going to get you. I was single at the time. He's like, we'll get you married, we'll get you involved, we'll get you ordained, and then it's going to be awesome. And I'm like, no, Father, I am not ready for any of that. And I think it put my ministry discernment, on hold for a while, because I just kind of ran screaming from that kind of zeal. I mean, he wasn't wrong, but I think he was jumping the gun, obviously.
Yeah,
Well, and
he told you God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, Isaac.
that's right. You know, as on the spend some time on the more forward sort of missional way of doing things. Probably less testing, more of that. Hey, let's do it. Let's move forward. What I can say is that fast does not equal missional. That sometimes we can confuse being willing to work quickly with missional, and slowly is not missional. And I think it's actually just the opposite, to be honest. One is we do have the scriptural command to test things and see that people be faithful in small things. But multiplication gets thrown around a lot, and I think it's a bit of a lie. I think the fact is that if you just calculate, you start with about 3,000 people at Pentecost, and there's a certain number of millions of people, when Constantine becomes emperor and converts the Roman Empire to Christianity. At that moment, if you calculate the rate of growth for the 300 years, it's about 3% a year. Yes, we know some years it was more, and some years it got halved because of people getting killed. But that really what we're talking about is not. It feels like we're beggars out there when we try to make everybody fit into our model and don't give enough time for the Lord to work and the people of God to discern. It's not just our job; it's the people of God that are sending people out. So if you really want the lay people involved, it's not only lay people who are involved in going out as leaders; it's the lay people who are being trained as the birthplace for leaders, so that actually your congregation, if well trained, can birth many more leaders over the years, many more fully formed leaders, much more discernment about character and ability than a single pastor who desperately wants to boost his numbers and wants to show he planted a church. We're actually compromised when making the choice because we want it so bad. And so I think that it makes sense. That's why we really move to something much more like a farm team. We often say we need, just like the baseball teams have AAA and AA clubs, you need a farm team with a long development cycle. And lay ministry is one of the tools in the right place to discern. And in fact, some of the best things that are happening out there are already doing it this way. Youth ministry was one of those farm team systems. You give someone some ministry ability, you see the ability, you see the calling, you give them some authority, but that authority is under a rector. It's in context where they can be discipled and kind of kept an eye on, but they have weekly responsibility for preaching a sermon or teaching something. They've got pastoral responsibilities. They've got the responsibility to get leaders involved and lay leaders involved in their ministry. And you can see what they do there. And those people tend to make better priests and better prepared to be rectors. The RUF in the Presbyterian world is doing this great. I mean, wonderful things. They're almost, they don't have a church planting a system as far as I know. What they have is they send people to colleges to lead college ministries. Well, that's their farm team, and it's a great farm team. And they plant churches out of there all the time. And so I think for us, what we should resist this desire to solve the problem of us not having the proper development in place for, we're new. We're a new diocese. We're a new denomination in that sense. And we just need to invest now in the deep roots that will produce fruit and leaders for generations to come. And I think that farm team system, that careful discerning, and teach our congregations how to do that work, how to discern leaders.
Well, I really appreciated what Venerable Peter said, about just patience and watching, and I think that's so contrary to how we are as Americans, right? I mean, we're immediately we see it's something that needs to happen and we go at it. But patience and discernment and seeing who is faithful and what is little. I think that is a huge golden nugget in discerning people with lay ministry, because as he said, the rector is not the end all be all. And that's why discernment, I think, has to come in community. You have to have a kind of a 360 perspective on this when people in the parish are looking at someone. I mean, you also have, obviously, every parish is going to have different challenges and different needs. I mean, there's going to be some parishes that really need a catechist immediately. I would hope that eventually it would be wonderful to have catechists in every church, an evangelist in every church. But you know, there's congregations where we need more lay pastors, lay readers, because we have clergy that are bivocational or trivocational. They only have so much time and to share the ministry load. So, but to be patient to see who can be faithful in little, and then as Venerable Mark was saying, as you go further along, you can discern
And
with more responsibility.
Bishop, to maybe just add a few more practical details that our listeners could use in their own parishes. Some of these marks of faithfulness are easily apparent just in the course of everyday parish life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is this person attending church regularly? Is this person supporting the church financially? These things ought to be readily apparent to the rector of the church. Rectors, if you don't have any knowledge of your church finances or your people's giving, you should. If you don't want to know amounts, some rectors don't want to know the amounts, and I understand that, but at the very least, you should have some clarity around who is giving regularly. And that matters because, if there isn't consistent participation and consistent financial giving, I mean, you haven't, you can't get to the next stage at all. And there's other factors that you can look at as well. But, is this a person that has a servant heart? And a little bit of life together in community, it's not hard to discern these kinds of things.
Yeah.
You had a very unique way of y'all got set up, Venerable Peter, with the kind of combining churches. You have some members that have been members of the church since before the church was there. And so, how did that work in that unique situation for you?
Well, it was a providential connection between the pastor of a Presbyterian church here, and we met and realized that we both knew Bishop Martin Minns. Martin had helped him when he was starting in ministry in Lafayette, and I shared that I had spoken to Martin just recently. And so Bob, the Presbyterian pastor, said, Martin gave me my start in this town. I'm going to give you your start. So it's one of those examples of the Lord working through generational faithfulness, seeds that were planted literally 4 decades ago when then Father Martin, who was church planting in Lafayette, helped out this future Pastor Bob. Those seeds flowered into this relationship and ultimately led to the merging together of that Presbyterian church and our new Anglican church plant. And we worked through the details. The Presbyterian church ended up closing, legally speaking, but more than half of its membership joined into the Anglican church. We took Pastor Bob on staff for the last few years before his retirement. But what that did is it gave a legacy resource, right, of the church and its building and its memory, together with the kind of younger energy of the Anglican church plant. And we combined those things together. And, to this day, we treasure the members of our congregation who came from that Presbyterian congregation, some of whom now have institutional memory and connection to this place going back decades.
Yeah.
And that's a valuable factor. We have one of those members is on our vestry now, and that's an important aspect of his ministry.
So, something that's come up in this conversation has been catechists, evangelists, missioners, those kinds of titles. And Venerable Peter and Venerable Mark, you all have started for the diocese a catechist training school. You've been generous enough to let me hang out with y'all and all that.
No, that's all for our benefit. That is not generous. That I needed you. I think if you're trying to get out of it, I'm not letting you.
Well, and you know, we're about halfway through the second semester for the kind of the pilot cohort. I was wondering if y'all could tell the listeners more about the school, kind of what's going on, and this kind of vision for these different official classes of lay ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it had to do with our vision of ministry, what's happening, the opportunity. One of the things that's unique to a multicultural diocese is that the terms that we use, catechist, lay reader, lay missioner, all of those things, they actually have different meanings in different contexts. In fact, even in certain African contexts, it means one, like catechist means one thing in Nigeria and means something different in Kenya, or they get used differently, or they use lay reader. And so one of the things that we knew is we had to kind of come up with a definition of what those terms meant for our diocese, so we could begin to use the same language, especially when you're authorizing people to do certain work. You had to know what you were authorizing them to do. And so that's where we started with the idea of this, that they should know what their job is. We should know what we're holding them accountable for and who would be good at it. And then at the very bottom of this document and they should be trained. And just as a brief overview, because of the rise of the first of all, the catechism to be a Christian, and its usefulness and focus in Anglicanism in North America, and really, I hear it's getting traction all over the world and in other denominations. That the term catechist used to be kind of free to use however you want, but now because there was a catechism, it really needed to have its more formal definition of someone who teaches the faith. Yeah. Particularly in baptism preparation, but just the faith, capital T, capital F, what we believe, what's required for salvation. And so we wanted to train more people to do that. And we knew that was necessary. And we knew that's a recognized gifting as a teacher in the church. Then we have the lay evangelist, which our diocese knows well. And in the African context and a missional context, those people who have called to go outside the church, that all they care about is that one person who doesn't know Christ will come inside and believe. Our bishop is an evangelist extraordinaire. He's never not talking and trying to convert people on the way to his plane and other places. And then the pastoral role, the lay reader, that person who helps with the liturgical functions, but also typically is more pastoral, is more the kind of person that might get sent to a hospital or do lay Eucharistic ministry. And then last, we needed a term, because we do believe in lay church planting, a term for a lay person who's the head of a small congregation under authority, and that's lay missioner. And so in that context, we then say, okay, we need to train all these people. And what is the training? Well, the training's the same. The training's the core catechism. The training's the core faith. How to read the Bible, how to teach that faith. And so the Catechist Training School was born out of a conversation a lot with Peter and I. And one of the things that Peter really was insistent about is that it has to be a 1-year thing. It has to be, you're not going to keep people for 2-3 years. Life is too transient. Things change. Let's get a commitment for a year and let's make sure that year really matters. And you can't get everything into it, but what we can get into it is really valuable. And so the basic structure is that we have a set of videos and a set of readings. And so each Saturday morning, we meet for 2 hours. In the first hour, we usually talk about the video. And the second hour, we talk about the readings. And you're on that, Isaac, and so is Venerable Cleo and Peter. And so we had about, I think the first semester, about 18 to 19 people on that. I think we're down to about 14 or 15 the second semester. But it's a wonderful time to talk about these issues, to really to mine the depths of the knowledge of especially Isaac and Peter. You guys have so much knowledge about these things, and we get to share from different perspectives. Our churches represent somewhat different approaches to churchmanship. And so that's been great just to share and talk about all of these issues each week. So it's this cohort, and it's a set of readings and videos, and it's been going. I think we're about 24 weeks into a 32 or 33 week endeavor. It also includes we had 2 in-person gatherings, which were critically important. And I think the thing that we've learned about the Catechist Training School is how important the cross-pollination is between both the students, but also all of us. And so in a diocese, and so many of the dioceses are very spread out in this mission work. We need a way to stay connected. And this introduced my guys, the guys who are from Missio Dei, to guys at Peter's Church and guys at Isaac's Church and others in the diocese. They just wouldn't have known otherwise. And so not only are we getting a base level of deep understanding, not only of the doctrinal truths, but also of the breadth of generosity in these things, that there is a lot of generosity, and there are boundaries, there are hard lines. So we want them to know, we want everyone to be generous, but we also want them to know where the hard lines are. But then the friendships that are being built, I think, will produce results for our diocese, just ones that we can't even calculate.
That was something that was in the in-person gatherings. I don't know why I didn't expect this, but it was kind of a surprise to me to see, all these laymen from the 3 churches hanging out, and like they're friends now. And I guess in my mind I was like, oh yeah, got this group here, this group there, but no, actually it's become a single group.
Well, and I'd say it's especially important, especially as we move away from the old model of everybody goes to the same seminary. So many of the Archbishop's friends and other previous Archbishop's friends, well, they met him in seminary. Well, if that's happening less, or people are online with their seminaries more, we need a meeting ground to create the future friendships that will keep Anglicanism moving forward. And this creates that. But also discernment doesn't just happen at the rector and local church level, it happens at the regional level. But I also think excitement happens there too. Our guys who are part of this have a level of excitement about being Anglican that's greater than now just being at the local church. They have a sense for the power of being a family of God over a geography, rather than just being the local congregation only.
Yeah. Well, and this is the pilot year still that we're in, and you guys are rectors, and you have your people going through this. As we look ahead to future years, what would you say to rectors, future rectors that are going to send their lay people to the Catechist Training School on following up with their people?
Peter, you want to take that, or you want me
to? Sure. I think the challenge that rectors need to take seriously is that this is far more effective for developing lay leaders if they can, in addition to the class time, they can have that ongoing conversation with their local clergy. And so rectors need to be aware that having members of their churches participate means they are, to some extent, going to be participating as well. Whether they're on the call every Saturday, or every week, maybe they're not, part of the faculty. Nevertheless, they do need to be in conversation, helping their developing leaders process and think through everything that they're encountering in these classes. Yeah. One thing that we have seen is that there is really significant value in both the connections across the congregations, but also in a kind of a sense of a cohort within a congregation. And that means both a group of lay leaders who are doing it together and can kind of have that conversation, and then having the conversation with the clergy. So, rectors who are thinking about this, it's not a kind of set it and forget it kind of thing. Formation of leaders for the long term is an involved process. And that's just the reality. I mean, I wish I could say it wasn't, but it is.
Yeah, I know for our guys, a lot of that is just we have an SMS group that we are chatting throughout the week about the readings, about just life, about other theological reflection. That's how it works for us.
Yeah.
How's that work for y'all in your churches?
Well, I mean, I've seen this before they jump on, the team from Lafayette jumps on the call, and after they're having robust conversations about some of these topics, and we'll bring up things. I mean, we did a poll, the 21 people on the call the first day we did it. Only one of them was a lifer Anglican, and that was me. And I'd still had some other experiences outside the church. Isaac was the second closest, moving around, but almost everybody's coming from outside of Anglicanism, which means when we have these conversations, there is going to be, you want additional processing happening. Someone who's not a Paedo Baptist, might believe about everything in Anglicanism, but not this. And of course, they're not going to end up being an Anglican clergy if they won't baptize infants, but they need to think about these things. Why do we believe them? And it might take years to process some of this stuff if you grew up in one view. So I think rectors do also need to understand that when we have conversations, it's going to bring conversations to their doorstep that they might not have anticipated. We're talking about a lot of real things.
And y'all hang out more in person, right? Right, Peter?
Yeah, in our case, we do an in-person gathering every week, and then of course the conversations actually continue through, our Sunday services and our other gatherings that we'll have as a congregation. As we see each other and we just talk. But I guess the point to add here is, and I realized my previous comment, might have come off negative. Oh, wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to spend this additional time? The positive side of this is, I mean, this is an opportunity to be a part of the development and growth of the future leaders of the church.
Yeah.
Right. And it really, it's one of our obligations, but also our opportunities that we have as clergy to be able to be engaged in that kind of conversation, that kind of development. And don't you want to be like Paul and have a Timothy?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's just been a lot of fun. I think one of the things we want to point out is of the group represented on this call, again, there's some that are out of our churches. Some of those are actually lay missioners that are doing their own planting work. But I have one who's preached since we started this, who probably that wouldn't have been a thing that made sense before that. I know Peter has at least one.
Same.
And Isaac, I know you got your guys doing some ministry, active ministry, leading evening prayers or morning prayers and things like that as well.
Yeah, we all of the guys that have been from my cohort have either taken over for morning prayer or evening prayer when I'm not there for our midweek. Some of them have taught, the adult Sunday school. Our guys are a little bit more hesitant to take up the pulpit, but they know it's coming. So I just have to push them into it eventually. If they're watching this video, watch out, guys, it's coming.
Yeah, just on but the three of us represent the 4, 5, 6, 10, I think 10 or 11 of the guys. 3 of them are kind of under my role as canon for church planting, who are doing ministry. I've got one who's a pastor of a church that's not Anglican. He got a call to be a worship leader, and he's giving catechetical training to a church that's not even Anglican, and they're hungry for it, and so it's fascinating, but have real substantial ministry, and that ministry is growing, I think, in every case, and the opportunity to give those leaders a chance to do something goes up, and it's not just that we feel more comfortable with them, but when they feel more comfortable, they feel more connected. This is an official thing. They're growing, they're learning, they're catching the drift of it, and they want to do more.
Yeah, let me put a little more color on that from our group. So we have 4, myself plus 4 additional participants, and I'll walk through briefly those 4 and what they're engaged in. So one was already in an ordination process, and in the course of the year was ordained a vocational deacon, and the the program has been helpful both in his own development and formation and in thinking about how to equip and raise up lay leaders in his diaconal ministry. Okay, so that's one. A second has significant gifting in the realm of teaching and preaching. And whether this would lead to a ordination in the longer term, I just don't know. But we've already seen the fruit of the ministry in 2 occasions when I've asked him to preach. One of the members is on our vestry and is now turning into an officer of the church and is taking on a variety of different aspects of responsibility in the operations and ministries of the church. And you can see the deepening of faith.
Yeah.
And then there's another who is young at an early stage of thinking through what ministry looks like. But I'll tell you what we've already seen is this past Sunday, there were 3 people in church who were there because they knew him.
Wow, praise the Lord.
So,
Yeah.
Praise the Lord. All right, so you guys are approaching the end of the pilot here. So there's registration for the next year. When is that?
That's it will open at Synod. So when we have our Synod, we'll announce it. It'll open. We'll kind of give the guidelines, and then we'll be encouraging people to. It gives us a chance to talk to a lot of the other rectors, and they'll have questions. So Synod will be when registration opens for the next year.
And the next year officially begins what, August, September?
I think we started at the end of August. It depends on when the school year lays in, but that date will be released.
Okay. Well, fantastic. You guys are doing phenomenal work, and I want to commend you all. Really exceptional. All right. I'd like to move on to a question addressed to Venerable Peter. The diocese is working on creating a better culture of lay ministry. What do you see being the greatest challenge for implementing lay ministry in our churches across the diocese?
it's a good question. The first point is there's going to be a definitional challenge. And I think having these categories that we've developed is very helpful. I think most people in our churches do not know these terms, or they don't know what is meant by these terms. So clarity and communication around what these different roles are will certainly be helpful. You know, we also have to communicate that lay ministry takes many forms, and there are these particular diocesan kind of recognized roles, but then every parish has its different forms. And in fact, every person is called to minister, right? I mean, isn't that the fundamental fact? Every person is called to minister. And so it's a discernment question as to what shape that takes. In a broader perspective, I think the challenge that we have is we still live in a very clerical kind of ecclesial culture, and that comes from both directions. It's honestly, it's not just from the clergy saying, "Oh, well, I'll do everything." It's also from the people who assume, "Oh, well, that's for you to do," right? I challenged one of our church members recently who we were, working on something, and he said, "Well, you're going to have a problem." And I said, "Well, actually, we have a problem." Which is to say, this is not, Trinity is not my church. It's our church. Actually, it's Jesus's church, but Jesus has brought us together, right, in this congregation to step out and proclaim the gospel. So it's a matter of encouragement to everyone to recognize that we all have a ministry. Now, the way that I would think about the differentiation, in a sense, between clergy on the one hand and specified lay ministry roles kind of in the middle, and then the congregation in general, is these have to do with degrees of engagement or separation from the world. Now, you can't push this distinction that I'm making too hard theologically because you'll run into problems, but I think it's helpful practically, because if you think about clergy, right, what are we doing? Our lives, our day-to-day lives are engaged in the church. We are dealing with oftentimes church buildings and church properties and church structures. When we're dealing with people, we're often dealing with church people, right? And so our lives are very much within this kind of church world, which is to say we have less contact on a day-to-day basis with the broader secular world. On the other hand, right, the congregation in general lives its day-to-day largely in its own places of work, right? It's usually secular workplaces or in the home. That middle space of designated lay ministry is something of the middle space, right? It's a little bit more withdrawn, right, from the world, a little bit more tied into the day-to-day culture of the church, and yet not to the point that clergy are. One analogy here is to the role of the vocational deacon, right? The vocational deacon has this kind of duality between the church and the world. And I think this is true for designated lay ministers as well. And this also illustrates the point about how important it is, because how is the church going to grow? Well, I mean, you have to have contact with the world, right? Yes. And so, you know, we need this role to be developed and elevated so that we can engage the world with the gospel.
Yeah, and I'd say it's just a picture of vision, right? We know in our diocese we are impressed with, and we like the power of sort of apostolic leaders who start things, who get things done, very independent. You know, this is, I mean, all the ACNA in so many ways has a little time where it's the Wild West of things, and that gifting is helpful, but it helps to start to see a vision of what a church fully formed looks like, what it looks like when leadership is right, but the next layer of lay leadership in terms of governance is right, the next layer of clergy, and then this other, you know, again, the farm team, these other leaders of various callings doing work, and in that greater, as Peter pointed out, that sort of middle way. And when we see how beautiful it is, but also how long term, I mean, for instance, when you talk about church planting now, what most people are worried about is there's no pipeline. Where are the people who are going to plant churches? Where are the people who are going to plant churches in 5 years and 10 years? We don't, you know, and so if you don't have them now, we actually have the ability in the church to grow the future church planters. But those are going to be people who have experienced lay ministry. God gave them a call, had a chance to step into fuller faithfulness and sacrifice. We don't want people to have no training, and then they decide they're going to plant a church, and now we're going to give them 3 years of seminary. And no, we want to grow the number of people who have 5, 6, 7 years of ministry experience, have years of thinking about and discussing the theological topics of the day and defending them. And then and leading teams, and when that person decides to go plant or become a priest, or, we get the calling, we have maybe 10 or 15 years of experience there, really deep experience in being part of the church and doing ministry. And so I think that one of the things that we need to do to create a better culture is to show the vision of how needed this kind of deeper root development is right now. It's not the time to try to take fruit. It's the time to really go deep in the churches that we have. And yes, the Lord's going to bring us some apostolic leaders. We love it. We know what to do there. But anytime we have a church that's developing, it needs to develop deeper roots and create a pipeline, because we've got kids coming up, and they're coming up, and they're 13 and 14 years old now. They're learning theology. They're learning how to worship. When they're 25, that's only a few years away. some of those people are being the ones that get the call to go to seminary, and I think that's really what I'm excited about, is the next 2 or 3 generations of church planters that we're going to have, and the quality.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being on today's episode. It's a fantastic topic. It's a fantastic thing that the diocese is aiming for, and your work is so much needed and so much appreciated.
Well, thank you, Bishop, for your leadership in allowing us to do this, and to giving us the charge to push forward in all these things.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us on. We enjoy talking about it, and we enjoy doing it.
Amen. All right. Well, thank you to our listeners. Next time, join us on another episode of Together on Mission.